Stories from the Bronto Journey. This is Joe Colopy, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes telling you some stories, a story, not the story, about my own entrepreneurial journey, and kind of along the way, impart some lessons of really what it took to make it happen, and hopefully some things that can be taken by other folks. This presentation was actually originally put together for a class at Harvard that I spoke to last week on entrepreneurship and innovation and startups. And so I modified it a little bit in order to be able to package it up here. Okay, let's just go ahead and get into it. So first off, so what is Bronto? So from roughly 2000 to 2016, I had this long Bronto journey. Bronto Software was a software company that was number one in commerce marketing automation. And what that meant is we worked with lots of different retailers and brands and orchestrated all of their communications so they can ultimately drive revenue, and how they could take one-time customers and make them lifelong customers. We became the leader in that space, leading the Internet Retailer 1000 since 2014. We were based in Durham, North Carolina. We, with time, built additional offices in London, Sydney, New York, and LA. We grew to over $50 million in revenue and 300 people. And although we started back in 2002 officially, we bootstrapped the whole thing, which was kind of different in the technology space and required some unique approaches. And we were acquired by NetSuite, it was a very large software as a service ERP financials company, in June 2015 for $200 million. And I personally left the company about a year later, and then NetSuite was acquired by Oracle in late 2016. So 300 and some Bronto software people are now part of Oracle. All along the way, there were kind of lots of ups and downs, but I think there are some lessons learned in that entrepreneur journey that I kind of hope to pass on here. So the first thing is I see it as a 5-leg journey, and these little bits didn't necessarily come up on the slides, but the 5 bits are this. One, there is the before. So before 2000, before even the idea of Bronto was a glimmer in my eye, there's a lot of interesting lessons there. And after school, I was a computer science major in economics, although I never trained as a developer. I went to become a teacher. I joined the Peace Corps. I lived overseas. So I really focused a lot more on communication. And through that communication, through all the teaching experiences, really got good or better at communicating a message, teaching, articulating ideas, organizing groups of, what I could say, kids in high school and middle school, which later on became very valuable for when starting Bronto. The beginning years from 2000, 2002 or 3, really 2000 and 2001, really was the genesis. And those had its own unique attributes that we'll talk about. But the vast majority of this graph from 2002 to 2005 is really about the grind. And that is the work that doesn't really get publicized, does not make for exciting headlines, but it's really the grit and the grind that makes for what's going to become a successful business. It is far from what I like to call the light bulb myth, where everyone thinks, oh, I have this brilliant idea and the world will tread a path to my door. It really doesn't work that way. It's quite more based on persistence. And then finally, the exit or graduation itself in 2015, some unique aspects with that. And then after 2015, the after. So you've been big and successful. What happens next? And I have my own story there as well. So let's just go ahead and talk about the genesis. First, way back when, in '99, I worked for a small company that became a very large company called Red Hat, which now is the Linux and leader in Linux and open source software. And that was really good. And I started that right after business school at UNC Chapel Hill. And I was a marketing manager there, had a good experience. And in my short stint there, which was a bit over a year, the company went from 100 employees to about 600 or 700, maybe even 1,000 employees. Had gone public, had a secondary. So a really big year. Had open offices all over the world, and really moved from this little startup to the beginnings of a real significant software company. But in the summer of 2000, I ultimately decided I wanted a different life. I didn't have a brilliant idea for a startup or entrepreneurial idea, but I was always intrigued with software and I was always intrigued with online software. So I wanted to take a stab at it myself. So left Red Hat without prospects in the summer of 2000 and started building what was a predecessor of Bronto Mail and Bronto Software. And that was a product called Database App. And the idea was customers could build an online database and have forms and reports and other modules coming off of it, and it would do interesting things for them. And really throughout 2001, I spent time figuring out how to become a developer. Even though I had an MBA, even though my background more recently was in marketing, I decided in my mind if I was going to be self-sufficient and do this, then I needed to build my own prototype and I needed to figure it out. And so I did. And I came up with this great product called Database App. And you can see here, this is my den in 923 Urban in Durham, North Carolina, where I spent many hours working by myself trying to kind of figure this out. And it was kind of a long, arduous journey. One, I was just working by myself. It was the dark ages of the software and internet. So it ended up being good, but there weren't a lot of other software entrepreneurs. There wasn't a lot of interest in funding at that time. But that actually let me focus. And I got to the end of 2001, and the product was pretty cool, and it had one major flaw, and it was I had no customers and no way of getting customers. So I'd spent a lot of time on product and none on customers. At the same time, my wife and I were going to have a baby in 6 months. I had not been working. I've been working without salary for a year and a half, and it was pretty demoralizing. And that's why the entrepreneurial story, particularly at the beginning, is much a psychological journey. How do you actually muster through those really tough times? So I always thought when things got tough, I'd be able to come up with something. And I did. I repackaged the product in January of 2002 into something called Bronto Mail. And I basically took one aspect of Database App, email merge, mail merge module, which the idea was taking your contents of your database and merging that with email and sending out emails into a very simple email newsletter product. And I was able to kind of craft this together, recast the code, and suddenly I started getting a little bit of interest. I had spent some time in local entrepreneurial circles. I had a good friend who ran a local tech publisher email newsletter, and he said, I actually could find this pretty useful. So if you, can I use it? I said, sure. And then we did some barter arrangement with ads so that I could get a little publicity. And that led to another publisher. And I crafted a deal with them. And then soon enough, that actually in the ensuing months kind of led to a few customers. And there's always the first interesting customer story. But it's really hard to get the first customer. It's really, really difficult. But if you can work through it and do whatever you need to do to get it, even if it's in a highly unscalable way, that pays dividends for getting your second. And then you'll find that it's just as hard to get your first customer as it is to get your first 10 customers, and just as hard to get your first 100 customers once you kind of get going. So then you kind of step into what I call the grind. Somewhere along the way, in April of 2002, Chaz Felix became a co-founder. I'd known him from other entrepreneur circles. He had actually also gone to Red Hat and for various reasons was kind of free. And so he was able to kind of join this fledgling startup and say, hey, let's do this. Let's go a little bit faster. I've got some kind of early beta customers and looks like they're going to become paying customers. And he was crazy enough to kind of join this journey. It kind of helps to be in your 20s when you make these type of decisions. But obviously it was a good one because we ended up working together very closely until the very end, until we actually sold the business many years later. But this is a picture from the phase what I call the grind. Our first office, one of our first offices after working out of my house, we had to move out of my house because I had a new baby and that wasn't going to work. So one of our first offices we moved into was in a Regis building, which is like a flex office space, kind of a 1980s, 1990s WeWork version. And we got the cheapest thing we could. And this was in October 2002. It was a windowless office, borderline closet. Chaz and I kind of sat in there and we focused on coding and calling. I would play CTO at night and develop the product, and we would both kind of call and support our small customer base during the day. And we focused very locally around Raleigh, Durham, because we can bring local service advantages that we couldn't bring to clients in California. And we built that client base just on any random small business that would talk to us that needed a pretty simple email newsletter product. And it was the grind, it was the hustle. And basically, that story continued in different varieties for many years. We like to think that we innovated. It was less about the what. I don't think Bronto Mail was a particularly innovative product, but it was very, we put a lot of energy in it and we executed well. And over time, we really found ourselves innovating in more of the how and the why, because we really did care and we really wanted to do something different. We grew, the team grew. Many of these folks actually are from UNC Chapel Hill. And we actually were able to get a window, so that was pretty exciting. And we hustled. This is a picture of one of our whiteboards. Eric was one of our first sales folks, and he just how it was gritty. Sales. Who can we get? How much are we gonna get for them? How do we service them? Let's go, 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 go. And software companies are built on sales. And as much as I have engineering training, it's very, very obvious that's what you need to do. So if you're coming from the engineering product side, you really need to start understanding the other side, because that's really what makes a business go. And how do you create a sales engine, and how do you do it at scale? We grew. We continued to grow. We moved in when we were doing about $1 million in sales. A few years later, we were able to hire some more folks. We were very lean with our costs, but we moved into a new renovated tobacco warehouse, a very small office, the smallest one we can get, in a very new complex in Durham called American Tobacco Campus. We were, I like to argue, the first folks to kind of move in, the first tenant, and that's since been a very successful large project. And everything was going great. And then we kind of got to a point in what we like to call in 2006 called the May Massacre, where we were growing. We were doing about $1 million some in sales, $1 million plus. And then it all came to a very abrupt halt. I had hired a new engineering leader and went on a massive multi-month attempt to rewrite all our software. And because of a number of different issues, including with that person, including the approach, we released the product come hell or high water, which I pushed at the end of May, and it was fraught with errors, and our customers who relied on us and relied on this product could no longer use it. It just was unusable. We also at that time had all our internal rules. We written them tools. We had written them ourselves, so we did not use something like Salesforce. We had our own tools. That was all deeply integrated. Those all had massive problems. So the business kind of stopped, and suddenly there was this massive set of issues that climbed that really was massively frustrating for all our customers, and people were threatening to leave, and some did leave, and so what we did is we kind of like turned around and wrote a very strong letter and communicated with our customers. And I told the team that we had built up a lot of currency with all our customers over the years, and now we have to kind of cash that all in. And this letter was a key piece of it. And we gave everyone a free month, which when you're an organically, iteratively grown business is huge. And that's everything. And we're able to kind of muster through, but not without losses. We definitely lost customers, and more importantly, we really lost employees. And not immediately, but it was a very stressful time, and we didn't realize that it actually could kill the business. And like all crises, as you dig deeper and deeper into it, you realize this could be it. This is worse than I thought. So we try to address that head on, and that was very much a great learning lesson. What was valuable about that is we were able to learn that we were a real business and that we had to treat this very seriously. This couldn't just be some kind of student project. And we were able to learn that when we were doing $1 million to $2 million in revenue, not when we were doing $40 to $50 million in revenue, when the stakes were even higher. So we continued to grow. We built a really strong culture. The faces, you'll see similar faces. You'll see changing faces. And it really was an exercise in getting great people and realizing different people make sense for different times of the business. And Chaz and I were extremely culture focused, very, very focused on our people. And we deeply believed that happy Brontos led to happy customers. We continue to grow some more. This is a picture is kind of closer to, 2014 perhaps, somewhere in that time frame. And then we're able to kind of scale. So in 2010 or 11, we set up a small office in London. And a few years later, we set something similar in Australia. So this little group of people that we had started with in Durham, North Carolina, were like, how do we replicate this? How do we replicate this culture and this vibe in different places? So it started to be very surreal to have little pockets of Brontos in different parts of the world and go visit and travel and realize this young group of people making things happen is really very, very similar to what we did many years earlier in Durham. But we are trying to create a platform to scale. And that included the organization. And those organizations started taking off. And we actually created similar little offices in New York and LA as well. And then we kind of get to April 2015. And for various reasons, we decided to sell the business. So NetSuite, we had been talking to NetSuite for about the last year. They were one of our strategic partners. And NetSuite was one of the largest cloud-based providers of financials and ERP software. They had recently, last few years, made a push into commerce and e-commerce. And along the way, we had focused a lot more on e-commerce and brands and retail away from small business and became a leader in that space. They decided one of the missing pieces they had was a marketing presence, a marketing piece of software, and really deep understanding of how to sell to the CMO. They understood the CFO and CIO very well, but not the CMO. We understood the CMO. And so this was going to be their largest acquisition by size and by revenue multiple by far. And we decided, personally, Chaz and I, we've been doing this a long time. The business was growing nicely. I foresaw that it was going to be difficult to kind of grow at the same rates in the future years. We would have had to kind of raise significant money, and decided it was a really kind of good strategic fit for the concept of Bronto to kind of move on. It was kind of a cleaner way for Bronto to continue, because in the future years we were going to have to take a different path either way, because we were doing about $40 million in revenue. In order to get to $100 million in revenue and grow at the rate we wanted to grow, we would have had to do something. We would have had to raise money to accelerate growth because of the law of large numbers. It was going to get big. And, from a personal side, we had done it a long time. I was kind of looking for a change. And so we did this. And so we kind of announced that. And we graduated into NetSuite. We announced the deal in April 2015. It was for $200 million, half cash, half stock. The business was entirely bootstrapped, so it really was primarily owned by Chaz and I. We actually had an option pool, so we were able to kind of share that wealth with our team. We were also, when we did the deal, we were able to give a lot of just straight up money to our team as well. In addition, as part of the deal, there was a fair amount of, there's actually $25 million in restricted stock that we were able to kind of share with the team that they would vest over the next 4 or 5 years. So there was millions and millions of dollars that we were able to contribute back to our team that was good. So obviously Bronto is a very different place now than it was then, but everyone got to participate on the financial upside of what was going on, and that was great. So I was really happy to see that. But of course, with any acquisition, the real work happens afterwards. This is a clever little logo that integrates NetSuite and the Bronto logo together. And it really is about integration. And integration acquisitions are really, really hard. You're merging two cultures that are very, very foreign, run very different systems. Bronto is a pretty mature company in many ways. We were very sophisticated with our systems and what CRM we used, what financial system we used. And we liked them and we were optimized for it. And suddenly NetSuite, they had their own ways of doing things. Some better, some worse. And we kind of meshed them together. And it's very distracting and very difficult to keep on running a business. Also, it's different when you're in the home office in Durham, North Carolina, and you could speak to me, the CEO, or Chaz, the COO, and then suddenly you are kind of this smaller group. You're the 1/10 or 1/15 of a larger business, and they know Bronto perhaps, but they don't really know anything about you, and their priorities might be very different. And so not only is that a hard transition for any executive, it's a hard transition for anyone in the company, because suddenly the layers they have to go through to get things done They're more, and more importantly, they're just different, and it just takes a while to learn. So that was pretty exciting. A year later, kind of left the business. Knew my goal was not to kind of move up the ranks of NetSuite. It really was to transition the business, and required a different type of leadership in order to do that. This is a picture from kind of a going away party, which was very kind of nice. The woman on the left, Carolyn Sprano, she became the GM, and she had worked with us for 10 years, does an amazing job, and really is doing an amazing job continuing the transition to NetSuite. Life got a little bit even more interesting because the story with Bronto and NetSuite wasn't over yet. So let me continue this. It's also worth noting that a lot of people call these things exits when a business is sold. And that's really from a venture capitalist investor perspective, because for them, they got out of their investment. But for the people there, it really is more of a graduation in the sense of that you're kind of moving on to the next step. Large businesses don't buy small businesses just for the hell of it. I mean, they do it because they're trying to add value and do something, and they need that business to take a different form to continue to add value and get even bigger within this larger thing. So I think graduations is probably a better word. Also, they're very bittersweet. I mean, if you're committed to building a great business, and most businesses great businesses are bought, not sold, that means you're really building your baby and something that you're very passionate about, and that certainly was true about Bronto. So they're very bittersweet. I mean, I think the best analogy, and I haven't gotten to here, is if you raise kids and they go off to college, you want them to go off to college. That's good. You don't want them to bum around your house. So that it's a natural progression and you're happy about that. At the same time, you miss having them around. You kind of miss those early days. You miss them as children. So it is bittersweet, and it's emotionally hard, and I don't think a lot of that's talked about. But for entrepreneurs who spend a long time building something, they built it because they loved it, and they ultimately want to kind of see it grow and flourish, and that the best path might not be with them, but it doesn't mean they don't have emotional connection. So there's definitely that. That summer, I was able to spend more time with my family. This is my lovely family, Carolyn, our 4 kids. RVing to the Canadian Rockies and back, which is actually quite far from North Carolina, that you soon figure this out after you're being in RV for several weeks. And while in Jasper, which is British Columbia and the Canadian Rockies, kind of far up there, I was able to get an internet signal and saw it was just announced that Oracle decided to purchase NetSuite for $9.2 billion. And by definition, Bronto would be part of Oracle too. It took several months for that deal to happen, but ultimately Bronto became part of Oracle, and it was a whole different game. I mean, you have NetSuite that was probably 3,000 some employees, so that's like 10 times as big as Bronto. But then you get part of Oracle, which is like 135, 140,000 employees, and it's just inconceivably big. Also, Oracle is viewed as kind of cultureless. I mean, it's just massive. And so a radical change for how people at Bronto operate, and a huge cultural change. And so they're still going through that transition now, and that's a really hard one. And probably ultimately, a lot of the people that were part of original Bronto, most of them will leave slowly, and they will find the next company that makes sense for their stage. But then, they'll be swapped in with people who are part of Oracle from the get-go, and that's kind of part of the growth of going from a startup to its own being part of a large enterprise company. I saw the same thing at Red Hat. Red Hat was like a little itty bitty little company, a startup, a quirky little startup, and even though it grew as its own entity, the personalities, 95% of the people who were there as an early startup aren't there now that it's a 5,000 or 10,000 person company. It's just a different culture. And so that happens. It's not bad. It's part of the process. And as an employee, as a founder, as an executive, it's more about figuring out where you fit into the puzzle. So that's been very kind of different. At the beginning of 2017, this year, I couldn't stay settled, so I started something called Coffee Ventures, which is really a vehicle to incubate and develop some ideas, invest in some local startups, because I really do enjoy the process. Sitting on a sailboat, living on a beach all day is not exciting to me. Plus, I have 4 kids, so I'm pretty tied to home. I did that when I was in the Peace Corps. I lived in a small tropical island called the Seychelles as a teacher. It was gorgeous and beautiful, but the vacation ends after a few weeks. And so something that's intellectually stimulating where you get to help and develop people is really rewarding to me. As part of that, started working on a project called People Of, and it's essentially an HR. It's like Bronto for people, merging, rethinking human resources and employee engagement and marketing, and applying those together. This is kind of the early team when we were working through it. This is Jeff and Zing, and you can see, at the end of the day, even though you might have more money and resources, you really can't skip some of the gritty steps at the beginning. This is very, very similar looking to the early days with Joe or me and Chaz, grinding it out and trying to get something together. And we're kind of doing the same thing all over again. And then here is a little bit a sneak peek of People Of. We are at the very early stages. It's different than early stages Bronto. Some ways good, some ways bad. We don't have the same, things had to be very, very gritty, extremely gritty at the beginning of Bronto Mail and Bronto because we had no money and it was just survival. And there's something to be said for that need for survival that it drives so much. At the same time, we have a lot more resources, a lot more connections, and a lot more experience. So we kind of know what we're doing in a better way. So we'll see where this goes. We're pretty excited about it. It's rethinking HR and people operations and creating a platform for companies all over the world with 50 or more employees, mainly 50 to 500, to really improve their cultures. And ultimately, when Chaz and I were building Bronto, as much as we were building a product and serving customers, really we were building a great organization. And People Of lets us do this more directly. It's a software platform for other leaders that want to build great organizations. So it's exciting. We'll kind of see where it goes. And I think the real question is kind of why, and why do this at all? Why do anything? And when you're successful and you're on the back end of it, you ask yourself a lot of these kind of questions. And the reality is you enjoy it. And for me personally, it's my art, and life is too short to retire. So it's something interesting to do that I sincerely enjoy doing. And I think you'll find that as a true story for lots of entrepreneurs. Let's just kind of wrap up a little bit. Lessons from the journey, just to roll 3. First things, I do see it as a journey. It's not a transaction. A lot of people, when they put on their investor hat and the way it's described in the press, they'll see it as a transaction or a window of opportunity. And I think as an investor, you do need to look at it that way. But for entrepreneurs, it is a journey. People are going to be part of that journey at different times. And a lot of the early experiences, which I describe as Karate Kid experiences. If you watch the movie Karate Kid, where Mr. Miyagi is teaching Danny or whatever how to paint the fence, wash the deck, he teaches him skills that he doesn't realize later on are actually karate moves and really useful. So for me, it was teaching. It was putting myself in very ambiguous situations, living overseas, muttering through that. And starting a company is very much the same thing. It's very ambiguous and it's very unknown, and it's about pushing forward all the time. The second point, Genesis, the beginning, it's rough and gritty. And if you're starting a company and you're saying this is really rough and gritty, you're probably doing it right. It's rough and gritty for everyone. It is not slick. It's not nice and packaged. There aren't nice little strategies. Personally, I had to pull more of my experiences being a paper boy when I was 12 years old than it was learning all these fancy concepts in business school. And that's what gets it done. And its passion and encouragement really matter. So having a peer group that could support that was really important. Move on, the grind. Those are the many, many years. Those are the many ups and downs that no one really knows except your spouse or something other or your friends. That's really hard, and it's about pushing forward. I was telling my daughter the other day this quote from Rocky 5. She's never heard of Rocky. She'd never heard of certainly Rocky 5. And there's this part where Rocky Balboa, I think, tells his son, it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep on pushing forward. And I think that's definitely true for the grind element. It's about pushing forward. There's also a quote, I want to say from Winston Churchill, that says, success is about going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And I think that's really was the key for Bronto, because it was not easy. The graphs make it look like it's just up and to the right, but there's a lot of little downs in there all the time. It was definitely a story of two story or two steps forward, one step back, and emotionally that's very difficult. Graduation, really about exiting, whatever you want to call it, is if you want to do something cool, you ultimately want to see it live on, and you need to architect that sustainability kind of a few years in advance. And it's bittersweet. It's hard if you build something worth keeping. But other companies, that's what they're interested in buying. So it kind of goes hand in hand. If you're just building something to sell it, maybe some fool will buy it from you, but people can sniff through that pretty quickly. They want to buy something real because ultimately they're looking to put that in their own organization, and after the transition, make that do even more interesting things. And finally, in terms of the after, the next, vacations end in weeks, and you get bored. And generally, people really do enjoy what they're doing. And so, particularly if you're successful fairly young in life, go do something interesting. Life is too short to retire early. You kind of do get bored, and there's more interesting things out there. It might just take different forms. All right, thank you. That is kind of the whirlwind tour through the journey of Bronto and the entrepreneurial story. I listed 3 websites: Bronto.com, Colopy.com, peopleup.io. Colopy.com is where I kind of document my entrepreneurial lessons and journeys and all the projects I'm working on. If you're interested in connecting, would love to do that. Just best place to do that is through Twitter. All right, thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed this presentation. Bye.